The comment was that there are certain points where the system becomes very, very vulnerable, that there are these kind of deficiencies become so pronounced. And this gentleman was saying he thinks this is one of those times. Do I agree? And if so, what are some of those pressure points that might be applied? I do agree. I actually feel this is a great time for us, that this is a very hopeful period, believe it or not. If you look at the pace of the revelations, obviously the Edward Snowden thing was very important. Before that, the WikiLeaks stuff, Dianne Feinstein, who really was a card-carrying member of the military-industrial complex, speaking out against the CIA abuses. Senator Grassley, a Republican, who some people say it's because he's a Republican, there's a Democratic candidate, but I think he's always been reasonably outspoken. He's been challenging the FBI about whether they're being candid. He wrote a very tough letter to them. Democratic Congressman Keating from Massachusetts did the same. So I think that on these civil liberties issues, these privacy issues, we can really come together. It's not really a left-right thing. And in fact, one of the frustrating things for me is to see how this country's always divided between left and right, and it's always, you know, they sort of split everybody, and then all the elections are close, and they use these hot button things to get people, usually their emotional, social issues, to get them people all worked up, and then that sort of tips the balance. The truth is that the 1% is really, you know, 1/10 or 1/100th of 1%. It's a very small group of people. And within them, there are some actually very fine people who don't like what's happening. So if you actually take the sort of bad people within the 1/100th of 1% or something, they actually are vulnerable because there are a lot of us and there are very few of them. And just understanding who they are and how they operate, they operate in the shadows. It's very important that however they're able to influence someone like Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or Hillary or any of these people is not known. It's not understood. How does that work? What's that mechanism? One of the things I mention to people is, and I'm sorry, I'm going on here because I'm sure there are many more questions, but one of the things that always strikes me is, they say, why does Obama do this or why doesn't he do that? Well, I mean, this guy was an Illinois state senator 6 years before he was president. I mean, he didn't know much. I mean, he's intelligent, a constitutional law professor. They play all that up, but what did he really know about any of these things? Even on constitutional law, he hasn't acted like a constitutional law professor. And the problem is, they always say the president's getting his briefing. And my question is, well, who's briefing him? Who are they? We never hear that, and they, a bunch of guys with crew cuts come in and say, Mr. President, here are your options. There's this and there's that. We can go into Syria and bomb a little, or we can go into Syria and bomb a lot. Which one would you prefer? So the whole thing's kind of rigged to get outcomes that these constituencies within the government want. But I think that I think that this area of rights and the clampdown in Boston, I hear people all over the so-called political spectrum being upset about that. That's why I think this Boston story, we need to stay on it. I'm hoping we can raise some more money because we need to put more reporters on that thing and really scramble all over every lead and just stay on it. So I think that itself is probably the biggest one right now. The question was about somebody's website and had I seen it, and he was just mentioning about what may or may not have happened when the bombs went off, if they went off, et cetera, et cetera. My default in most of these things is to apply logic. I saw pictures of people with missing limbs. I assume those are real missing limbs. I mean, I think those people have relatives and neighbors and stuff, and if they fake that, I do think that would probably become known. Whether it's possible that there was more to the scene, we do know that there was a drill taking place almost contemporaneous with this, just as with 9/11, there were drills going on at the same time. That concerns me because that's a common intelligence technique, that you have multiple things going on. In my book, Family of Secrets, where I talk about the Kennedy assassination, this is, I don't think, ever been reported anywhere. The week of the Kennedy assassination, it has been mentioned a few places that they were holding this bottlers convention, people who were soda bottlers, but they didn't mention that there was something like 8,000 of them, complete strangers, poured into Dallas, and were all there at the time. You know, this is the kind of way that you can create cover for military movements, for all sorts of things. And so I think that we need to be wise, and we need to be awake, and we need to know that these are the kinds of things that are taught at the military war colleges. They're certainly taught when you're in intelligence agencies, the use of deception and distraction and so on. I think we need to be open to all of it, but at the same time, we need to be cautious and we need to be responsible. And it is a problem for serious investigators that there are always people proposing scenarios that sound so kooky that it sort of taints the serious inquiries. And we're very aware of that, and we're very, very careful about that. Sure. The question was, I had mentioned earlier about Cheney being told he'd be the head of Halliburton. Can I name names? Yeah, I mean, there may be in my book. I think you can look that up. There was a hunting trip of a number of men. I think we know the names of them. And it's that circle around, you know, sort of the Bush family. A lot of those companies like Brown and Root, and later became Kellogg, Brown and Root, and Dresser Industries was controlled by a group of people that the Bush family was involved with back to the 1920s. These are these different companies providing different kinds of oil services and so on. And they have all these interlocking boards of people who are on this and on that and so on, and they all know each other. And, you know, I mean, that's pretty much how things happen everywhere. I mean, how does somebody become the new head of Microsoft? I mean, they don't decide they're going to be the head of it. Somebody else decides that. So I think that's just the way things work. Yeah, the question is, numbers show that a large majority of Americans believe that John F. Kennedy was not killed by one person, that there was a larger operation there. And how, you know, what does that mean that people believe that stuff? People are very comfortable living with internal inconsistencies, and they're perfectly happy to say, oh, yeah, we know, yeah, probably it was the mob. Or, see, the thing is, there are many variations on the conspiracy. It was the mob, it was some disgruntled element, it was a conspiracy, but it was the Russians who were the conspirators, it was the Cubans, or it was anti-Castro Cubans. There are many, many variations. If you, to actually do a proper a poll, you would have to actually, you would find that the public would break down into lots of different groups with different theories. You know, if you talk about what percentage actually agrees with the dominant theory of the skilled researchers, the sort of people who've spent decades studying this, there is a general consensus that what happened to John F. Kennedy was some kind of a coup d'etat. That it was very similar to coup d'etats that the United States has been involved in Guatemala and Iran and the Congo and so many different places. Do you need some water? Are you okay? All right. There really is a kind of a consensus on that. I don't know where the public is at accepting that, because, again, this is about the mythology. It's about basically America is a good country, and although it does some bad things, the people themselves are inherently good. And so the idea is, yeah, it's true they kill democratically elected people in other countries, but they would never do it here. To which I would reply, well, why would you not take action when the stakes are the highest? If you've got a big company and the Kennedy administration is coming after you, you're not going to sit by. If you didn't sit by when Allende was going to maybe nationalize your bottling plant, why would you sit by when, you know, your whole company potentially is threatened at its base? And so I'm not sure how evolved the public is on that, but I do think over the years more and more people accept that. And yet what's quite extraordinary is if you look at the best-selling books on the Kennedy assassination, there are 2 or 3 or 4 of them that are all say that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. And they get all the ink. If you go to the universities and you go to the bookstore and you see what's on the reading list, it's all baloney. And if you go to, again, your favorite, you know, NPR, PBS, this and that, The Nation magazine, they all say that the Warren Commission was right. Now, how is that possible that those good institutions stick to the original story if 60 to 80% of Americans don't buy it? I mean, this is the kind of thing we need to explore. Yeah, the question is, how is it then that the media acts as it does and is so sort of blind, willfully or otherwise? I've spent years thinking about this. I think that the stuff like the term conspiracy theorist has been so effective in sort of inoculating the establishment that journalists know. And by the way, things like what happened to Dan Rather, every so often there's something like that. You probably know about this, the Rolling Stone journalist who died in a one-car crash, the one who did the story about a General McChrystal in Afghanistan and so on. I mean, we were one of the few news organizations that started looking at his crash, what he was working on at the time and so forth. And then it really came out very quickly in the media, somebody says he had some kind of a drug problem and he was this and that or depressed. You know, they always do that. Well, maybe and maybe not, and we need to look at these things. But I think that there's basically, let me put it this way about journalists. Journalists are like everybody else. They like their job. They enjoy the perks. Yeah, kids in college, whatever it is, they want to keep their job, and they know you cannot stick your neck out. In Australia, they call it cutting the tall poppies. You know, the people like to say, if you're in Australia, if you stand out as really excellent, people want to cut you down. So they have this kind of brain drain, people leaving Australia because of that. In the United States, if you want to stay in journalism, you know what to do and what not to do. And when you don't, when you get out of line, bad things happen to you. And so people say, well, look, I'll do what I can, which isn't a lot. I'll do what it is. So the whole system itself is rotten, basically. And that's why we need to invent a whole new journalism. That's why we started Who, What, Why. We don't plan to be small. We plan to be big. With your help, we plan to grow into a major international news organization. We keep our costs low, but we still need support, and we're looking to bring people on board working for us all over the world, and online and video and audio, and tell stories with graphic novel, comic book style drawings and everything, whatever we have to do to reach people. And we particularly, of course, want to reach the younger generation. I mean, here we are right near a college campus, and I'm guessing most of you are not college students, How do we reach them? I mean, what are they doing? They're all off watching House of Cards or something, about how evil the system is, So the question was there any evidence of private contractors being involved in intelligence work around the Boston bombing? There is. I mean, there were all those people. I'm sure you've seen this. It's all over the internet. All these guys with the black hats and black backpacks. And as soon as the bombs went off, they immediately were sort of taking control of the scene. It's quite astonishing that a year later it has never been firmly established who those people are. We are told that some of them were in insignia for a contractor called Kraft International. We've looked at that. We're continuing to look at that. But it's quite amazing in this country that, I mean, you would think that, do you remember that video of that night they had arrested a young man who looks quite a bit like Tamerlan Tsarnaev? They had him stripped naked. They had him on the ground, and then you see them bundling him into a squad car. Their mother said that was her son.
Tamerlan himself has also been put, from anonymous sources, say, on a CIA database of people to be monitored, which is added also to previous investigations by the FBI, so it raises further questions as to why these two were not picked up here.
Indeed, you talk about previous investigations by the FBI. It was 2 years ago that Russian officials told the FBI about Tamerlan, but apparently he still managed to slip under the radar. Artist Tom Barton, thank you.
Hello, is this Merit Tsarnaev?
Yes, speaking.
Hi, my name is David Knight. I'm with Infowars.com. It's Alex Jones's operation. Have you heard of us?
Yes, I've heard of you. Yes.
And we would very much like to do an interview with you. Would that be possible?
Since I have seen the material that you presented for the public before about these bombings, even before the names of our boys were put out there, I was following you, from the very beginning.
Okay.
I don't know. I have trust in that information. I have trust in you, and I would like to have my word said.
Good.
Especially in the part when the guy that is that was taken into custody by police, then given over to FBI. You know who I'm talking about,
Yes.
that clip.
Yes, yes.
A naked guy.
Yes.
I have to publicly state that I confirm and identify this person as my nephew, Tamerlan Tsarnaev.
The police had, from multitudes of agencies, all had their weapons drawn, pointing at a vehicle that we could not see from our vantage point. They were screaming for somebody to put his hands up, to get out of the car. At some point, he did do that, because then we could tell that the officers were relaxing. We still couldn't see the car or the suspect. Then at some point, they brought him from his vehicle to a police car. He was completely naked. He'd been, during the confrontation, I did hear him, and I believe you may be able to hear this on the tape we shot. They were ordering him to remove all his clothes, including his underwear. It was clear.
And then later, supposedly he dies in a shootout. I mean, the authorities were almost never questioned about this, even though it was on Fox and all the channels. You could see, if you go online, you can still watch this thing. Just type in, arrest and Boston bombing, April 15. It's amazing. How could that not be interesting to the New York Times and the Seattle Times and the Boston Globe, that they're not interested in a man who looks exactly like the terrorist was in custody? And then, and so somebody did ask him, and you know what they said? They said, oh yeah, that was another guy. Well, who was that, please? If you arrested somebody, we ought to be able to know who was arrested. It's just staggering. Rich Lang, I think, had a question. Yeah, the question was, have we done anything on this rash of suicides of people in the financial industry? Very interested in that. Our problem is we're small, and we're already way overextended. We get, I cannot tell you how many things every day with people saying, you really need to look into this thing, or I'm being harassed, or whatever it is, and we don't have the capacity. So we're trying to, I don't want to talk about money, the filthy lucre, but we need more money so we can hire more people and get on these things. That story is very high on my list, because those are people at all these big banks who supposedly were aware of and were privy to, billion-dollar scams affecting all of us. So obviously, if all these people suddenly, go ill or jump out of windows, we ought to take a look at that. Again, the media is completely AWOL, not doing anything. It's just bloggers who bring that stuff to our attention. The question was, what do I think the role of those brothers was? Well, I don't know, and I never want to state with any kind of sureness, because the whole nature of what we do is to keep our minds open and keep digging. But the very fact that the FBI was so involved with him, the fact that, this letter that Grassley sent, which is in one of our articles, you have to read this, it's quite amazing. He sent a letter to Comey, the head of the FBI, asking all these questions, including, did you know who these guys were before, when you said you didn't know who they were? What was the extent of your involvement with them? And he actually says, I think you ought to know, there's a statistic which the New York Times published, that out of 22 potential plots, like where supposedly somebody was thinking of doing something or something was discussed, 22 potential terrorist plots in the United States, 14 of them involved FBI informants. In other words, that's a majority of them, at least, were people who were encouraged to go and stir something up. And so we'll have more on our site about this. Just the other day, there's a report, all these Muslims said they were told they were going on the no-fly list unless they became informants. The FBI, throughout its history, has had thousands of these people, thousands. In Family of Secrets, I reveal an FBI program I don't think was ever known before, working with the American Legion, where the American Legion offered, I think American Legion has maybe it had like 1 million members or something, and they were going to all spy on their coworkers and stuff to see if anybody was a pinko. And they originally, it was offered to the Roosevelt administration, and they said absolutely not. You can't do that. Absolutely not. And then, as far as my research shows, Hoover went ahead and just privatized it and did it. And they did it for 30 or 40 years, collecting information on their neighbors and everybody and giving it to the FBI. So I think that we need to take a hard look at what these agencies really are, if they actually work for us or not. Somebody here was pointing out to me during the break that a very politicized outfit from the beginning. I mean, what they did about black people and gays and Native Americans and every other group you could think of. I mean, it's always been a kind of a shock troops of reaction, very responsive to the interests and needs of corporations. And, I, for one, who covered the fall of Ceausescu and fall of the Berlin Wall and all these other places, I can tell you that, I mean, these kind of state police are of a type. And I don't think everybody's bad in any of those outfits. They get in there as a careerist thing, or they're young and idealistic, or maybe they're in there trying to do the right thing. But then I don't mean, if any of you are in the FBI, I don't mean that you're necessarily bad. But it is a problem that they're spying on the rest of us and intimidating people. And remember the guy down in Florida? He was a friend of Tamerlan Tsarnaev, and they were interrogating him, and then they shot him dead. He was unarmed. Any way you look at that, you have to ask, would he really attack an armed FBI agent? Did he? I mean, it turns out the guy had just had knee surgery. They made it out that he was this, martial arts guy. Well, maybe so, but it was a martial arts guy with knee surgery, And he told his friend he was afraid something bad was going to happen to him that night. And we'll have more on that on the website. In the back there. Right. So the question is, the gentleman is pointing out that in some ways we need less privacy about certain interests, particularly those that are driving things behind the scenes. I totally agree. In fact, if you think about the paradox, all the wrong people are being spied on. We're not doing anything, and they got cameras everywhere, and they're watching what we're doing on the internet, and they use this stuff. You notice about that? They use stuff like child pornography. They always find something because they've done all their tests, and they know that people will be upset when they when they wanted to get rid of Gaddafi. And you can read on Who What Why. One of our fans, Bill Moyers, was asked, what he likes to read anymore, and he mentioned two publications, and one was Who What Why, and he said it was really where he went to find out what was really happening in Libya. And I have to say, your favorite alternative TV show, I'm sure you know what I mean. It's a show that's on every night, and a liberal left show. They almost all their guests were in favor of bombing Libya and bombing Syria and all this, because the government, Obama's a Democrat, his base is liberal, so they had to convince everybody that this was good intervention, not bad intervention, and they did it. They pulled it off. And the thing with Gaddafi, the thing with Assad, it's the same thing. They had no problem with these people before. Those people hadn't changed at all, but the plan changed. And if you don't believe it, go to Who What Why and type in the search box General Wesley Clark, and watch Wesley Clark. One is a speech he gave to an organization in San Francisco, and the other is a private interview he gave to one of our people on camera. And he says that right after 9/11, he was at the Pentagon, and he was shown a memo that listed 7 countries that the U.S. planned to invade using 9/11 as an excuse. They've been talking about this stuff, the Project for a New American Century. This goes all the way back to 92. Wolfowitz and Pearl and Cheney and Rumsfeld, under George H.W. Bush, they decided as soon as the Soviet Union started collapsing, they said, we can be the world's only superpower, and the key thing is we need to be able to go in anywhere we want to go in without anybody asking any questions. But they realized the American people would never go for that, and the rest of the world would never go. So they need to invent these excuses. Now, with Gaddafi, they knew that women are generally anti-war, so they made up stories about rape. And suddenly, that it is true. Women and men do care about different things. And as soon as the story went out that Gaddafi was ordering his troops to do mass rape, you could see the poll numbers shift among women. Now it's time to start bombing. And this is how cynical this stuff is, that it's all studied and it's all planned, and it works. It really, really, really works. So the question was, what do I think about the bin Laden removal, and why would the American people believe that story after all the lies that we've been told? Is that pretty much? Okay. So again, it sounds kind of funny because for a tiny organization, we've covered almost all of these things. Again, we're the only ones. Right after that, we started writing pieces. You'll see my byline on a lot of them. Fortunately, as we're bringing on more people, my byline doesn't dominate quite so much. But one of the questions I asked right away was, I mean, of course, we had been told for years that, he was ill, he was dead, he had died years before and so on. But what interested me, there were many facets of that story that interested me, but just on the surface, they said that there were 2 helicopters involved. One of them crashed, and everybody got out fine. I don't know, any of you were in the military, you probably know, when a helicopter crashes into a wall, I mean, everybody isn't fine. I mean, it's just, those are somewhat delicate crafts. I mean, any plane crashes into a wall, I mean, everybody isn't fine. So, they said everybody walked away from that. And I remember reading in an Indian newspaper, I think it was, they interviewed the next door neighbor who had been on his roof at the time, and he said that plane crashed and they all died. Now,
we are not fools. It's America and the dirty American policies. Whenever they want to take control of an area, they act this way. Osama was never here.
What is it? And of course, if they crashed and they all died, what would have happened? I mean, Obama wouldn't have been reelected because Fox News would have been all over him forever. That's unacceptable. Look what happened to Jimmy Carter with the failed hostage thing, which there are questions about whether that was sabotaged. But do you remember about a month later, this was this SEAL Team 6, and then about a month later, another group of SEALs, SEAL Team 6, about the same number, died in an unrelated thing. Their plane was shot down. Now, we never saw the names. I mean, could it be that the people who died in the original thing, that they made up the story later to cover up the fact that the whole thing had been a disaster? I don't know. But a good journalist ought to be looking into this stuff. Now, another thing that's strange is their rush to throw the body into the sea. I mean, that's just not standard operating procedure. I'll tell you something else. It's also not standard operating procedure. So when all your country does is chase and obsess about terrorists, to just kill the guy who has all the information instead of interrogating him. And they claimed, listen to this, they left it up to the SEALs to decide what to do with him. Now, do you believe that the Pentagon, the CIA, the president would say, yeah, you know what, take him out for an ice cream sundae, whatever you think is, I mean, it's astonishing. And the failure of these major news organizations, and again, your favorite alternative show, none of them asking a single question about any of this. Sponsored by Lockheed. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So just not to go on too much about this point, although this is one of my favorite ones actually because it's so ludicrous. A few months later, they interviewed Brennan. Why did they throw the body in the ocean? Remember they originally said, do you remember the reason? Anybody remember? Why did they throw his body in the ocean? They didn't want the body to be honored. I mean, who cares? Well, first of all, what were they expecting? That stadiums were going to be filled? I mean, it's just insane. It doesn't, they don't care about that with anybody else. I mean, it's just absurd. Plus, you could have buried it in an unmarked grave somewhere. Nobody would have known. So that doesn't make any sense. And then they say, later they changed it. Oh, well, why did they throw it in the ocean? They changed it. See, they always change the story, and the media doesn't notice this stuff. But that's the story. They said, Brennan said, Brennan used to be the head of the CIA station in Saudi Arabia, where Osama bin Laden's family is to this day extremely influential. So he says, oh, yeah, we asked the Saudis what we should do with the body, and they said throw it in the sea. Oh, we just asked the Saudis, and that's what we do? I mean, it's insanity. There are dozens and dozens of things about this story that don't add up. Anything is possible. I mean, he could have already been dead. They could have faked this thing. The guy in that house might not have been him. If you look at the pictures, it doesn't look like him. This guy liked to watch porn. I really don't think Osama bin Laden watched porn. I mean, I may be wrong, but I don't think so. There was never any indication that he did. If you look at these two guys, have you seen the pictures? The nose, the ears look pretty different. Maybe his ears grew a lot in a few years. I don't know. I mean, my point is, these guys lie to us all the time. It's like, you remember Charlie Brown and Peanuts, and Lucy says, I'm going to hold the ball and you come running up and kick it. And then he says, I'm not doing that because last time I did, I go flying and I fall and I kill myself. And she goes, yeah, well, I'm not doing that anymore. I go, come on. And then he does it, and what happens? I mean, we got to turn to Charles Schultz for some wisdom about how to handle this stuff. So I probably don't want to keep you too much longer. We have maybe time for a couple more questions? Or? Okay, ma'am. The question was about the militarization of police departments in the United States, with it being a very significant factor here in Seattle and federal funds coming in, and what can people do about it? First of all, these are not ringers in the audience, but that's another story we've written about at Who, What, Why. We're almost alone in covering that. There have been a few articles here and there. We've tried to do it on an ongoing basis. We actually spoke to a police chief who said he didn't want that stuff, didn't need it. And as we pointed out in our most recent article, the crime rates all over the country have gone down. There's a corresponding, the more they ramp up with this stuff, the less there's a justification for it. And this is pretty alarming, because this is how you get a police state, a military police state. So what can we do, and how can we make people care? I think, honestly, people just are not really, they say you have to expose people to the same information at least 3 times before it registers, so on and so forth. So I think that, we have one fellow who's one of our donors, and he just sends stuff to his brother regularly. And eventually the brother started reading them and started paying attention to it. I think it's just it's a numbers game. You wear them down with good information, stories well told. Yes, sir, back there. What role the Koch brothers are playing. And yeah, it is true the Koch brothers are these almost like, again, cartoon evil. I'm certainly interested in them, but you see, the very fact that the media covers them so heavily, and particularly the left alternative media, makes me suspicious that maybe they're not as important as they're presenting them as. Because my rule is, if the media pays a lot of attention to something, it can't really matter. And I would say that they're a distraction, and they volunteered to be, like Karl Rove, the lightning rod, so that we focus on them rather than the fact that this is actually a phenomenon that's much, much broader than them. That's my take on that. The question was, how do we find out who's pulling the strings, and how do we break their power without a revolution? I would argue that the gentleman, I can't even remember if I fully answered his question, it was about secrecy, and that we need more transparency. We need to shine more of a light, and I think that goes to your question as well. We need to know a lot more about these people. We need to vigorously demand our rights in the release of records. We have a very good Freedom of Information Act, which has been sort of whittled down a bit under the clauses of the war on terror. Police departments that used to have to give us reports now say it's an ongoing investigation. That's a story we want to do. They say that about everything, and supposedly it's an ongoing investigation. They're still investigating the Titanic. You can't know about these things. So we need to start demanding accountability. We need to support those few elected officials, whether it's Grassley, and you may be may not be a Republican, and he may be, but support him in his inquiry. Support Ron Wyden from your next door state of Oregon, who's been really outspoken. He and one of his colleagues, Udall in particular, have been very outspoken in complaining about these things. Encourage Dianne Feinstein to keep growing a backbone, and if you sort of piss off the right people, they'll start doing something. The thing is that, it's a sport in the United States to attack and make fun of and undermine elected officials. But the fact of the matter is, we need them. Most of them are not really evil or bad people. They're people like us who, run for office and try to do something. But the system is very tough. It's very hard to make a difference. You see that with a Kucinich or something. Who listens to him? And so, I think that those people need support, and they need I'm not talking about just campaign contributions, because I think that's like dumping it all down a mine shaft. And I think a lot of that's a waste of money. But I mean, just once they're in there, is to take an interest in the bills that they're sponsoring and get other people to talk about them. There's always a tipping point on these things. If enough people, you probably know that in your community, if somebody's got an eyesore on their lawn or something, I mean, suddenly everybody's out with pitchforks, So there's a tipping point, and I think we have to study on issue by issue. What is that tipping point? What would it take to get people to do things? Ask people, to do small things. Again, will you will you come hear somebody speak? Will you watch this DVD? Will you look at this website? Will you consider, liking this thing on Facebook? I mean, how hard is that stuff? And it really makes a difference. I mean, I'd love Who, What, Why's, our Facebook thing is going up, but it's kind of like crawling. And I'm thinking like, why, people love what we do. Why is this not exploding? How hard is it for people to click like or share or something like that? So there are a lot of things that we can do to, and I think there's a point of critical mass. And when you have critical mass, these people respond. Don't forget, they do respond when they sense that the public won't put up with something. I'm sure you can think of examples on many, many things. Certain things get through. I mean, the public wants single payer. They didn't get that, but they got something. And it's better than nothing, despite the tremendous interest arrayed against it. So I think on quite a few issues, we actually do see some progress when we push it over the line there. How about one more question? Somebody have a question that's going to take everybody away feeling all warm and fuzzy or something? Was that your question, sir? Oh, more depressing stuff. Okay, yeah. Yeah, the question was about former Governor Siegelman of Alabama is in prison. We actually talk about people in Alabama being in prison. We did a story on our website about a blogger who was sent to prison for blogging in Alabama. And he was there for months and months and months. We wrote a number of articles, interviewed him in jail. And then finally the New York Times wrote something, and now he's out of jail. Did the New York Times cause that? Did we cause the New York Times to look and then write something? We don't know. But that's what I'm talking about, being the phytoplankton in the food chain. We are, all these news organizations are beginning to discover us, beginning to look at us going, yeah, Boston thing is kind of strange. Maybe we need to do something on that. What are my sources? People say, what do you like to read? This is going to sound like a cop-out. If I had a lot of really great things to read online, I would never have created Who, What, Why. There really isn't a lot. I mean, I'll tell you, we do a little compilation of headlines from other places. I read the New York Times because it's full of good information. I read the Washington Post. I read the Nation, and I watch these shows. I mean, I absorb all of these things. But frankly, my main source of information is people like you. You see something and you send it to me, and it's kind of like having a large, like Obama's briefing group of the crew cuts. I got my own briefing group, and people are saying, you ought to take a look at this. And I like that. It's kind of like the stuff gets sort of previewed a little bit. And we hear and we see things that we might not otherwise see. People send us stuff from a newspaper in Pakistan or whatever. You have to have your net cast widely. If you get everything you do from some, glossy magazine put out in New York, or you watch one network and you think you're getting the truth, you're really getting a skewed perspective. And by the way, it's very interesting that centers like New York and Washington, the people are the worst informed. Do you know this? We've discovered that a lot of our best informed people are people like you out in America. A lot of them don't even have much of a formal education. They're truck drivers and they're farmers or whatever, and they're self-taught. They read books. They go home at night and they're not all watching, the Tonight Show or something. They're curious and they're reading books. Like this gentleman mentioned a book, there are lots of these different books and blogs, and they're reading this stuff and they're thinking for themselves. And we make a mistake when we look up to these gatekeepers. And people say, well, you should be on Jon Stewart. But I mean, he works for a large corporation that's making money off of that stuff. And, his guests are like Bushes and Cheneys and the Yuck It Up. It's a great show. I told somebody the other day I was at the Daily Show. They said, finally. I said, yeah, well, I was in the audience. Eventually maybe they'll invite us on and we won't say no. But the reality is that we don't want these corporate institutions to be defining our worldview for us. And sadly, the chattering class in Washington and New York and LA and stuff, they're kind of in a little bit of a bubble. It's the Truman Show all over again, and their reality is very, very skewed. And also those people have a stake in the system, all those people who voted for Obama and, they drive a Prius and, they compost, every third Thursday and they, this and that. But, they really, they work for large corporate law firms and who are their clients, so there's that cognitive dissonance. And I think they just, they don't know how to renounce all this stuff because they're, we're all sort of hooked up to the matrix.
The matrix is a system, Neil. That system is our enemy. When you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was. Look again.
I think the exciting thing, and I'd like to close with this, is that we can pull ourselves off the matrix. I think the fact that you're here is testament to that there is an uprising happening in America right now. We see it with our own site. Our traffic is zooming. More people are contacting us every day. I've been contacted in the last couple of weeks by people from the military, former military, and intelligence, and all kinds of people saying, I love what you do, and I have some stories I'd like to share with you. I've been afraid, but you're giving me encouragement to come forward and share what I know. And I think what's going to happen, I saw this. I covered East Germany, and I was there before the wall came down, and I saw people beginning to rebel. I saw people, there was a meeting at a pastor's home. Churches, by the way, are very important for this stuff. There was a meeting at a pastor's home, and they were already discussing, could we change this totalitarian society? Because there were already cracks in the system. You may remember back in '89, there were all these people starting to go to the embassies in all those Eastern European countries, and so they started having these meetings. And I got on a bus, and a bunch of young people wearing ski masks got on the bus and quickly passed out leaflets and then got off. And then I was driving with a German guy, and we were taking pictures of this giant garbage plant in East Germany that was burning all the garbage for the West Germany because they didn't want the pollution. And we were taking pictures, and we stopped our car by the side of the road, and these two guys got out of this little East German car. They were wearing big ski jackets, and they said, what do you think you're doing? And my friend, who was West German, said, oh, fuck off. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are Stasi agents, we could never be heard from again. And I said, I think you're a little bit overconfident here. And I said, and he said, they have no power anymore. And I said, well, it's not, and so I said to him, listen, you translate, tell them to chill, everything's cool, everybody goes their own way, and no problems. And they left because they didn't know. And a few months later, when I went to Romania, I was one of the first journalists to make it into that country when they were supposedly overthrowing Ceausescu, although it turns out he was overthrown by his own people, his own internal security people, in a fake, like everything else. But what happened there was that the same kind of thing happened. We were trying to get through the border, and the border office, border police, they wouldn't let us go. And the reporter I was with from Spain was afraid because she'd been turned away, and she thought they'd arrest her. We went into the border station to talk to the head of it, and I said, I'm not worried. She said, why not? I said, look on the wall. What do you see? And she said, nothing. And I said, exactly. On that wall would be pictures of Mr. and Mrs. Ceausescu, and they already took the pictures down, okay? I think what's happening in this country is all of these people who are complicit are starting to take the pictures down. Thank you very much.